Everyone is going out there and they're going, well, should we use ChatGPT? Should we use Claude? Should we use Copilot? They're benchmarking the wrong piece altogether. It's about what is the level above that.
How do you get the broker to make sure they call you first? Have you bought them a beer in the past week because you want that deal flow?
If a broker is sending you a deal and essentially you can turn that around in a day, he's going to more likely say, okay, fine, let's go with that. Whereas the company that spends 3 weeks doing due diligence and they're going, oh, hang on, we need more time to go into sort out our numbers. Sorry, the deal's just gone. The platform is building the knowledge of the company. The data and the knowledge is really a CRE firm's moat. What makes them different to every other CRE firm out there? One of our classic demonstrations is when we'd say, we go into ChatGPT and say, hey, how useful is Walt? And the answer is, what do you mean, Walt Disney? Coming through. But Ellie knows that context straight away and then comes back with all of the definitions and where it's useful as a metric, where it's not useful as a metric going through.
Hello, welcome back to Bricks, Bytes, and Bold Moves, the future of real estate. I'm Dr. Kate Jarvis, the CEO and co-founder of Fifth Dimension. Today I'm talking to you from Singapore. As some of you may know who have been following the business, we launched a new office here about 2 months ago, betting on an Asia-Pacific expansion strategy, having raised our Series A. We're really excited about our growth in this region, with some customers already around the world, including in Hong Kong and Japan. And much like other people who are looking at global economic trends at the moment, we can see a lot of capital, for example, with international investment managers who are divesting some of their assets from the United States and looking to invest more capital in and through the Asia-Pacific region. For example, across the real asset space, Class A office buildings are performing really well in this region right now, whereas in other parts of the world, not always performing so well. So we like to go where the real assets industry is hot, and this region is one of those places. So in growing the business here, we have been hiring a lot of really great talent from the region, including who I have with us today, Robin Langdon, who has joined us as a founding pre-sales engineer. Thanks for joining us, Robin.
Great to be here. Thank you, Kate.
So you have had a really interesting career in technology, and you've really worked in a lot of different spaces. So tell me about what got you interested in technology, first of all, and then how you found yourself at an AI native business for real estate like Fifth Dimension.
Yes, this could be a long story. So I've been involved in transformation for, over 30 years now. I remember back in the early 90s doing the first sort of digital transformations when the internet was really just getting going properly. Netscape just launched their browser. We were all using silicon graphics, big machines, and really just trying to start to digitize information and make it available, over the web that people could start to use. And the world has come on so much since then. I mean, I went into the big dot-com boom. Then we had the whole rise of Web 2, coming through. And then now, of course, we're talking about AI transformation, which is a whole new thing. And how is AI just completely transforming all of the different processes and ways of working? And then worked across multiple sectors, and every sector has been going through this journey of, how do they start to become more efficient? How do you identify what processes they're using? And just using those and using technology in the right way. So I've been doing this now for many, many years. Sometimes feels way too long. But then finally coming into CRE, which I guess I never would have planned for earlier on in my career. But it's really, I think if you go back to the transformation piece, and it seems to be the last sector that has been left that hasn't been transformed. And it's like, when I first started exploring CRE and when we first started talking, it was very much that the big innovation was PDF. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yes, we've moved from paper to PDF. Well, and this is the big thing. Thinking, okay, this is an industry ripe for transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of the industry is still riding the innovation wave of Excel. So if you have an Excel model, you're pretty technically innovative as a business.
Yeah. Everything's PDF or Excel, and then the really innovation, comes from macros in Excel or a complex formula. rather than using insights that the AI can give you to really make things more efficient.
Yeah, so it sounds like you essentially think problems or challenges of digital transformation across different industries have a lot of similarities. So in telco and other industries, what experiences are you bringing to helping us transform commercial real estate and infrastructure so we can really take our Excel models, our beloved Excel models, and turn them into something a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient, and a little bit more insight-driven? So how can you think about applying your experience to helping an investment manager or an asset manager do their work differently?
Yeah, as you say, telco. So I spent many years in telco, which is a highly regulated, process-orientated industry. And there are organizations like the TM Forum, and they really spell out all of the processes. They define everything. They define all of the different levels of processes that an operator might want to use. They define all of the application map across the whole kind of stack of the IT stack. And so everything's really well defined going through. And so when I came into CRE, I was looking, well, my first thing was I need to understand this sector really well. Where's the process map? And it's like, okay, there isn't one. So that was the first point where, I thought, well, surely other sectors have this. We need to start making sure that we create this properly in on the CRE side, because in telco, very much everything is driven through that. So suppliers are creating solutions based on that. They know where to plug into a telco stack on what to go and do. Interoperability becomes really easy because everyone knows what's fitting together. And it helps push things forward in terms of innovation and starting to link different things together. And with AI, and people talk about MCP servers with different so it's just a form of API of different systems talking to each other. Everything becomes standardized, and so it helps the whole industry as a whole become more efficient. And so I think applying that to commercial real estate and an investment manager who's working on a spreadsheet. How can they start to take something maybe that they're working on at a personal level, being very personally productive using Excel, but then moving that up the scale to becoming productive at an enterprise level. And I think that's really what we're driving towards in a transformation a program, is how companies are taking their people, their processes, their technology, and driving that together to give them new insights, new ways of making additional revenue. Everything. I think we've been very lucky in CRE that there's been lots of money in the past. There's been no issue getting deals. Maybe that'll change in 2 years, and the companies that aren't changing now are going to struggle later on because all the good deals will be taken by the companies that have the insights. And so I think again, mapping that back to that investment analyst, they're going to find it difficult if they don't catch up now.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true. And I've been having some of these conversations with businesses here over the past week where, as you say, in prior economic cycles, there were so many good deals to be done, and there was almost a kind of complacency that resulted from that point in history where, okay, I'm managing a portfolio of really well-performing assets. I don't need to look to optimize this portfolio for another 20 basis points, right? It's just kind of happening on its own. And now the environment is so much more competitive throughout the entire real asset life cycle. So as you say, starting at the point of sale, how do you get the broker to make sure they call you first? Have you bought them a beer in the past week because you want that deal flow? And how that point of origination goes on through the underwriting process. If you can't assure a seller that you have your investment fully ready to go at an agreed valuation within a day rather than 2 weeks, you're likely to lose that deal.
Yeah.
And the business that's likely to win it is the one that's using AI.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then on down through, right, asset management, where in order to understand what's happening in your portfolio, those 20 basis points today might really matter. And they might be hidden, right, in the long form data of that Excel, where you're not even reconciling your CapEx, OpEx, and P&L properly to figure out where you're not collecting rent or where you haven't escalated rent where you should have, and you're leaving money on the table, essentially.
No, and your point about the broker. I mean, if a broker is sending you a deal and essentially you can turn that around in a day, he's going to more likely say, okay, fine, but let's go with that. Whereas the company that spends 3 weeks doing due diligence, and they're going, oh, hang on, we need more time to go and to sort out our numbers. Sorry, the deal's just gone. And so the market could be very different. And you and I, we were at an event last night, and there was a little talk there about, the market is changing. I heard a lot of conversations around interest rates are now starting to increase, especially in this part of the world, in APAC and Japan. Finally, after 20 years of going nowhere, being flat, the economics are changing very rapidly. And so I think we could be in a very different position in a year or so.
Absolutely. And I think that uncertainty makes it more important than ever, as you're saying, to invest now, to not wait in digital transformation. I think at this point, we've mapped out 85 different processes common across commercial real estate and infrastructure businesses. And we use that map to help our existing strategic partners to find a place to start, right? Is it perhaps top of the funnel underwriting, scoring initial deals against your buy box? Is it something farther down the funnel where you have a virtual data room with thousands of documents in it? You have no idea what's even there and what isn't there. Tell me more about how that process map is really used. So I think it's used in helping us drive transformation at a people level, but also has an impact on the product, on the platform itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think first of all, the process it's identifying what makes CRE tick. So in terms of there's different parts to a business. As you say, we've mapped out over 85 processes, and every firm will be slightly different. They can map themselves to that map and go, well, we use 30 out of the 85 or 40 out of the 85 processes, and it identifies the key parts. So whether that's on the acquisition side, so as you say, deal screening. Or going through to asset management or through onto the financial operations piece. So those kind of the high level, sort of level 0. And then everything starts to break down into almost like a detailed task level process. So that identifies the work that is there to be done. And then in terms of how to make that more automated and more efficient, we've essentially mapped out the starting point, and then the scaling point, and then what is the leading point for that. So where can you start very simply in terms of being more efficient than you are today? So if that is taking an offer memorandum coming in and running a deal screen on it, that could be a starting point to just get an analysis, a deal screen done very, very quickly in minutes rather than days of an analyst time doing research. And then once that's kind of the starting point, then you can say, well, actually now I want to start to scale my business and become more enterprise productive. And so maybe being able to screen multiple deals and figure out which are the ones that are going to apply and can be best for the business to go for. And then at a kind of a leading process would be, okay, I now want to link this into all of my systems. So I'm going to tie it into my CRM system and where my deals are. I want to go and get financials straight from our ERP system. I want to get insights straight from my data warehouse, and just have all of that data all flowing in, so that you're getting all of the information is just seamlessly operating without having weeks of work and integration to be done to bring that in. So the process is really, they define what is it we need to do, and then it's almost the transformation story or journey that a company can go on in terms of each individual process. And every company will be different where they are in that journey.
On that point, I want to play devil's advocate for a second here, because it almost sounds too good to be true. And I do hear this from a lot of businesses when I first start talking about Fifth Dimension and the work that we do in commercial real estate and infrastructure. And I think it sounds too good to be true kind of on two fronts. The first is, okay, sure, there are commonalities, right, in the way that every business underwrites a deal. But what about my business, right? My business has a specific DCF model for assets that are mostly multifamily, mostly in Australia. How would Fifth Dimension work with my templates, with my way of thinking? And that relates to technical questions, right?
Yes.
So in past iterations of software, that's serviced, right, automating processes within a legacy industry like commercial real estate and infrastructure, you would have to go through this like really onerous sort of back and forth with a technology supplier saying, oh, no, don't, our DSCR breakpoint is 1.5x, not 1.7x. And it would take 6 months, right, for that change to take effect in the platform in order for the platform to do the work that you needed to do specific to your business. So tell me more, right, under the hood. How does it work? What are we doing?
Yeah, and it's, I guess you're right. I mean, and if you go back maybe, sort of even just 5 or 10 years before the advent of AI, then you would be into a big integration project. You're building a system that does a specific deal screen with a specific set of parameters, and then you go to another model, another firm, and it's all very different. And they're looking at a 6-month implementation timeframe to go and do something, which will scare off anyone. And really, with the advent of AI, all of that goes away, because now everything just becomes, just a simple prompt into the system to go and change a particular skill in there, or to configure a new dashboard. So, hey, I need to see these metrics on my dashboard, and I want to dig into this particular data. And everything becomes very simple to prompt the system to set that up. Everything is configurable. There's no longer the months or even weeks. It just becomes days to set things up properly. To go through, and again for APAC, languages come into play, hugely. With maybe you're dealing with assets in Japan and Korea and then Singapore, and you've got information coming through in different languages that all need to be translated. What is the confidence level in that translation? How can we cite everything back to those original, source documents that are coming through? And then the models, learning about the particular business and their own particular model, so that the model is improving over time. So the more models you start to put through, the system is learning itself going through, rather than going through. The old days was you have to do a change request and you submit it into IT, and then they think about it, and then someone writes a spec, and then it gets coded, and then it gets tested, and then the business has moved on since when that finally goes live. And so I think AI is just, it's brought now just a whole different kind of speed of doing things, where things can be done now. Literally, we're talking about minutes, aren't we, to push these things through. And so the platform really is, it can look very, very different depending on which firm is using it. And you mentioned about different assets. I mean, obviously here in APAC, there's a lot of different asset types. We're seeing a lot of interest on the infrastructure side. With data centers and renewables coming through. And so, the models are different, the dashboards are different, the reports coming out are different, but it's just a configuration of the platform to go and set those up.
Yeah, as you say, I think especially in this region, newer products and platforms are really popular. So data centers, which have a longer history, for example, in the United States, it's more greenfield here. And as you say, that comes with it a lot of, this is the first time I'm ever really modeling this type of transaction. There isn't, 20 years of historic transactions data that I'm using to help underwrite this deal. I'm doing it a bit differently. And it's funny for me to think about that in prior sort of eras of technology development that we have both lived through, where something today that's relatively arbitrary and immaterial from a software standpoint, you could create a whole new UI essentially in 30 seconds, right? That's now in Japanese using, local land data, rather than that being 3 years and that being an entire business model of an entire different organization. Yeah. And I know that many of the businesses that we work with in the region today are still paying, a supplier, a technology provider, just to do translation, right? That used to be its own business, yes. A huge booming business, especially in this region, because of how much cross-cultural and cross-linguistic communication is necessary in order to build out an investment management or asset management business. Today, I think what's not always obvious to the industry that we work with is that what people are benefiting from with Fifth Dimension's platform is not just the commercial real estate and infrastructure intelligence that we've built into it. It's also how AI native coding, how AI native programming has completely changed the world. they're getting that value because it's how we develop product too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you think I mean, geez, I remember back to when I was coding in, Perl scripting, trying to create, hard-coded HTML pages. And it's just a world difference now where we're going in, we're just specifying a problem. And it's that specification that you just feed down into the system, and it creates all of the code, the models, the financial side to build things up. So if you're building up quite a complicated underwriting model, for example, that's just a specification going in, and it's using a combination then of AI plus building up the mathematical models in there to get more deterministic answers coming out. So yeah, no, it's well, and then if you bring on, for example, on the language side, you could be onboarding a new investor, let's say in Korea, and you want to start creating an investor report in Korean. No longer do you have to worry about that translation service. It's just just saying, hey, for this particular investor, I want this language, and for this one, I want this language going through. So and it's all done in minutes. So it's a completely different paradigm now to what it was before.
Yeah, and I think most people view the counterbalance, let's say, to this excitement, the promise of AI, as the issue of hallucination and accuracy. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you think about accuracy and how a platform like Fifth Dimension delivers or ensures a high degree of accuracy? Because these are business critical processes, right, that we've just been discussing. There's a lot of money at stake. There's people's reputations at stake.
Yeah.
So how do you think about how we drive accuracy with Fifth Dimension, and how does that relate to the technology, right? Is it about model choice? Is it about something else?
Yeah, and it's you mentioned the word there about the models, and I think the models are really just the underlying foundation that need to be used, and it's what you build on top of that. And it's with the enterprise guardrails, and then having the audit trail and the reasoning logic put in there, so that that can be given and giving confidence and consistency to the end users. And then on the accuracy side, it's about having that technology that has essentially lots of evaluations that are going on the whole time. So it's not just putting in a prompt into one of the large language models and saying, "Hey, give me the answer for this." Well, is that answer right? I mean, if I type something into ChatGPT and type the same question into Claude, I'm probably going to get two different answers. And so, with the 5D platform, obviously we're putting in lots of controls above that to say, well, let's go and check what we're giving back is an accurate and consistent answer to go through. And to make sure that it's accurate, we are always making sure that we're citing back to sources all the time, so that if someone later on comes along and says, well, where did this number come from? We can go, well, actually, it's page 32 of this contract, clause 3.2, and here's where you're going to get the information. Or, why is your net operating income, this particular value? And we'll say, well, it's based on this calculation, and we can provide a complete audit trail of what we did. And the analyst has said at this point in time that they want to use the lease aligned data rather than the T12 data because they felt that was right. And all of this information, all of these essentially human decisions coming in, get recorded in the system. They get audited, and people can go back and play that back essentially and see what was there. And I think that starts to build trust in the platform that you wouldn't ordinarily get with just using a straightforward horizontal model to go through. And I think then the big labs they know this as well. They are saying now. I mean, Brockman, the president at OpenAI, was saying, look, we're not the product. They're just the foundation. And there has to be other products above that which are supplying the kind of the industry specific kind of pieces of there's the security, the accuracy, the consistency, and all this going through it, and also the support as well. Those guys aren't interested in supporting every single firm out there, and so there becomes this whole ecosystem above.
Yeah, I like to think of it that way, that the foundation models are really the operating system, right?
Yes.
You don't just open your laptop and, today maybe you interact with your shell if you're a little bit more technical, but you think about interacting with applications, right? I want to mess with my DCF model, I open Excel. I don't think about, whether it's powered by Windows in the background. Do you think that relates to what's happening today with AI?
Yeah, and I think I'm showing my age now. If you go back to sort of MS DOS and Windows, and we all started off kind of using those systems, and you kind of got a brand new computer and you're playing with Windows, and you're going, well, what can I do with this? Oh yeah, I can use Paint. I can draw a little picture. But it's not actually helping me in my business, but it's providing a foundation for something. And when we first got them, we weren't sure quite what, and we thought it was nice that we could move windows around. And then Office came along, you said, and there's Office was broken down into the specific models that we wanted to use. So we could use Excel for building out our financial models. We could write reports in Microsoft Word, and really, rather than 2 or 3 operating systems in the world, basically, that everyone would then go and use and solve everything. That never happened. There was, I think there was a report once saying that for every $1 that Microsoft made, there was like $9 or something that it was made by the ecosystem around them when they came out. So there's a much larger ecosystem above that, and that's typically the same with what we're doing at 5D. We're taking some of those kind of foundation operating system models. But then we're providing the specific industry model pieces. So the Excel sitting on Windows is essentially, we have our own models in 5D that we use, but we'll also cool down and use the operating system if we need to. If we need to make an operating system call to do a fundamental piece that's not worth us, where we wouldn't add value to. But where we are adding value in terms of that, let's say the Microsoft Word of writing a document, or doing the financial analysis piece, or writing an actual piece of Python code that builds up a complex financial analysis. Those are the pieces that really start to add the industry specific knowledge and value on top of those models.
Yeah, and I think that difference is really observable for businesses that have tried playing around with Claude, for example. You can ask Claude to look across a variety of different Excel models or documents and say, okay, tell me what's inconsistent about these data. And Claude might be able to come back and say, oh, these 2 NOI numbers don't match. But what Claude can't do is say these 2 NOI numbers don't match because the way that Japan defines NOI is different from the way that Australia defines NOI.
Yeah.
And that's the real application layer that Fifth Dimension is focused on.
Yeah, and then there's terms are different in different countries. Tax rates are different. The way people do accounting and matching to GL accounts is different. And so our platform is really taking all of that into account. And so when you're prompting and setting something up, the system knows exactly. Oh yes, I'm operating in Singapore. No, I've got Japanese information coming in here. And it recognizes the context of that rather than just blindly taking some document coming through. And actually, we just recently launched in the platform around document intelligence going through. So if you just go into Claude and say, well, what is this? What is this document? And you say, well, it's a Word document or it's an Excel document. With 5D, we're not really interested in that. We're saying, well, no, it's a lease. Or it's a T12, or it's a valuation document, but it's much more relevant to an analyst in a CRE firm.
Absolutely, and I think that leads me on to my next question, which is, if you're advising a business, obviously we're biased towards our own technology. I'm not going to pretend that we're not, but to go back to first principles. How would you tell an investment manager, an asset manager, maybe the CFO within that business, the CEO within that business, how to pick the right AI to really help them move forward?
Yeah, and it's something I think I think the first thing I'd always go and say is that they're quite often benchmarking the wrong thing. Everyone is going out there and they're going, well, should we use ChatGPT? Should we use Claude? Should we use Copilot? And it's they're benchmarking the wrong piece altogether. It's about, well, what is the level above that, and how is that going to impact the processes that they're essentially running in their business, and it's about taking the usage of AI from a consumer level to an enterprise level. So we've all seen it. We all use Claude day in, day out, and we've become personally very productive in doing that. But what's the impact on a company, on one of these CRE firms? If someone can do their job and go home early, great. But what's the impact for that particular company? And then what if they leave the company? Where's that knowledge gone? So they've been maybe doing some spreadsheet work. They've done some stuff in Claude or ChatGPT, and then they move on to another firm, and all of that knowledge is basically lost. Whereas with our platform, everything goes up to an enterprise level. So everything is being stored in the platform. The platform is building the knowledge of the company, and so the data and the knowledge is really a CRE firm's moat. What makes them different to every other CRE firm out there, and it's about the institutional knowledge that they're building up, and so if an analyst leaves the firm, then but all the stuff they've been working on, everything is captured in the platform, and somebody else can just take over and pick up from there. So it's talking to the CEO. It's about setting up an enterprise level solution rather than just letting people play with a consumer, more efficient solution that way.
Yeah, it comes up a lot for me when I'm having conversations with, again, heads of functions or executives at real estate and infrastructure businesses where, during an investment process, let's take an example, you are underwriting a logistics asset and it hits all the right metrics for you for your buy box, but there's something about it that you're uncomfortable with. And you think, oh, maybe it's that it's not close enough to a highway. It's not going to be the best situated for the supply chain. That's going to drag on our OPEX. Something's playing in the back of your mind when you're going through this underwriting process. And it takes someone on the investment committee saying, like, hey, we invested in an asset that looks exactly like this 10 years ago, and it went really badly. That's why you're having this emotional reaction, right?
Yes.
Is in your head, there's a whole bunch of experience, there's a bunch of data that lives as a part of your business's way of doing things. Your intelligence is up here, and we want to put it in something that's shared, a platform that's shared by the entire team, and that, as you say, persists throughout history, whether an individual stays or goes.
Yeah, and with our agent Ellie in the platform, I mean, Ellie really becomes part of the team. Ellie is acting like a senior analyst in the team and just learning all of this information. And so when you say, there's something not quite right here, you can actually go and ask Ellie and say something doesn't seem quite right. We've had use cases where, and you can have a normal conversation where you're not having to put in a 2-page complex prompt from one of these prompting schools where they say you have to specify context and objective and instructions and assumptions. You're just saying, hey Ellie, I think there's something wrong with this asset or this deal, and Ellie has all the context already, and can go off and then search all the information that's already there in other deals and go, this deal is very similar to this one, and there can be a connection made between that. And then come back with all the relevant information, the financials, why that deal over there didn't work, why is it applicable to this deal coming through. So, and all of that can be just surfaced very, very quickly and easily to almost like a coffee machine type conversation rather than a massive prompt specification.
Yeah, I think that accessibility is really important, right? I think there's a lot of anxiety about I can't get the right answer from the technology if I don't know how to ask the right question. Yes. And if you feel silly or stupid yourself when you're using it, that's not going to make you want to use the technology.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of our customers coming to saying, well, we're very nervous about using AI. We're not quite sure, where do we start? And we really say to them, look, it's just treat it as another employee, and you're having a conversation with Ellie in the platform, and you're just talking normally and asking questions, and Ellie picks up from that, and Ellie already has the CRE context. One of our classic demonstrations is when we'd say we go into ChatGPT and say, hey, how useful is Walt? And the answer is, what do you mean, Walt Disney? Coming through. But Ellie knows that context straight away, and then comes back with all the definitions and where it's useful as a metric, where it's not useful as a metric going through. And so it's very easy to have that interaction with the platform. And it's just natural prompting.
I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. If you're nervous about working with AI, treat it like an analyst, right? Please update the waterfall according to these new assumptions, and Ellie will understand what you mean.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with me today. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully we can have you back in another 6 months and check in on how it's all going.
In our lovely studio here.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, Kate.